World Affairs Roundup next on International Focus.
The Institute of World Affairs at UWM and Milwaukee Public Television present International Focus, a global magazine linking Wisconsin and the world.
Welcome to International Focus and another edition of our World Affairs Roundup. I'm Robert Ricigliano, Director of the Institute of World Affairs at UWM. Today we'll be looking at Pariah Parley. Former President Jimmy Carter raised eyebrows in Washington with a series of meetings with Palestinian personas non grata. Meanwhile, Egypt brokered a truce by several Palestinian armed groups, and Turkey initiated a back-channel dialogue between Israel and Syria. Is the Middle East diplomatic train leaving the Bush administration at the station? Pomp and bullets. In a demonstration of force, Taliban fighters sent Afghan President Hamid Karzai and assembled dignitaries fleeing from mortar and small arms fire during a military parade in Kabul. The attack again raised questions about the capability of Afghan government security forces. What's driving ongoing insecurity in Afghanistan, and is there an alternative to major U.S. involvement? Unsustainable agriculture. As soaring food prices and shortages threaten to set off a cascading series of crises around the globe, UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon announced the formation of a top-level task force to address the problem. What are the implications of this perfect storm in the global food supply, and what can be done to stop it? European welcome. Seeking to bolster the pro-European camp in upcoming parliamentary elections in Serbia, the EU signed a precursor agreement for Serbian membership. Factions on both sides, however, say the pact is a betrayal of principles. Will Belgrade join the European club? To help us explore these issues, we're joined by John Katzka, a retired U.S. Foreign Service officer who has conducted public diplomacy for the Department of State on 4 continents. Ann Hamilton, political scientist and coordinator of international studies at UW-Whitewater, who also served in the U.S. Foreign Service. And Robert Kraig, author of a number of articles and books dealing with the history and politics of American foreign policy. He currently serves as Director of Program for Citizen Action of Wisconsin. Well, welcome back to our Roundup stage. And I wonder if we could start with you talking about the initiatives in the Middle East. And I suppose this is on one hand or the other hand. On the one hand, these various initiatives, if you accept the premise that the Bush administration is being left at the station, could be read as a bad thing. On the other hand, these are all signs of movement in the peace process, and that might be seen as a good thing. So where do you see it?
I see it as well, the Bush administration is in its last throes. I mean, it's not going to be around much longer. So the fact that it's being left at the station, or at least unless there's a lot going on behind the scenes, which there may be that we're not unaware of. But I do think that the movement that's been made is good. I even don't share the opinion that former President Carter's trip was a total disaster, because he's made these trips before. He met with Hamas and nothing's happened to him after he met with Hamas. And it's a way for ideas to float and for ideas, initiatives to get out. So I think that since the parties don't know who's going to be in the next administration, when everybody's watching, it's a time of where there could be an opening. And I do think that especially the agreement, or it looks as if they're making progress on the Israeli-Syria front, and that would be very, very positive. Well,
John, also a former diplomat, how do you see the Carter initiative? Is it opening up possibilities, or is it a pain?
I think under other circumstances it might be useful, but right now it's getting in the way. I mean, Egypt was talking with the parties about a ceasefire in the Gaza Strip. Turkey is somewhat brokering a relationship between Syria and Israel, and the second one's much more important than the first. And I don't see Carter's participation in this as being anything other than naive and gadfly.
We mentioned the Syria channel being more important. What makes you feel that the Syrian-Israeli channel is more important than the Palestinian-Israeli one?
Well, first I'd say I don't know that Turkey's role is all that important either. I think that that's a way in which the two sides can cover for the fact that they are talking to each other. Syria has a strong interest in being able to come up with a solution for its relationship with Lebanon. That's very crucial to it. It's its opening to the Mediterranean. Israel is very concerned about that flank of their border. If they could come up with a way in which Syria controls Hezbollah and get the Iranians and the U.S. to buy into that, the U.S. buying into the Israeli position, Iran buying into the Syrian, that could bring some stability to that part of the world.
Robert, when Carter was talking to Hamas, he made a point of saying that the U.S. policy of not talking to Hamas and giving Syria a hard time is counterproductive. So is it counterproductive, or is it setting the stage for, say, what Egypt might be doing or what Turkey might be doing?
Well, and I have to defend Jimmy Carter. I did my master's thesis on him at the University of Georgia, but and the professional diplomats have never liked Jimmy very much. But I would have to say at this point, the Bush administration, with its policy towards Iraq and Iran, has no credibility as a peacemaker, and as Ann points out, they're almost out the door, barring some Zimbabwe-like scenario in this country. And so it doesn't hurt. And quite frankly, since the United States is such a lightning rod in large parts of the Arab world right now, the best way to get a peace agreement is through these means, through what Jimmy Carter's trying to do, but even more, as John says, even more promising, that what Turkey is trying to do between Syria and Israel. And the United States is going to have to back up an agreement. I mean, the United States spent a lot of money to back up the original Camp David's Accords, bring Jimmy Carter back up with massive amount of financial aid to Egypt, and that's going to that probably needs to be part of any deal as well, ultimately. But the United States not being the lead is probably beneficial right now, but obviously chances of a peace treaty agreement right now are pretty slim by any scenario.
Let me add just one point. I don't think I don't disagree that this administration is in its lame duck stage. But on the other hand, no administration in recent years has had much credibility with the Arabs in the Middle East. We are seen as pro-Israel and tilted in that direction. And so someone outside may have more possibilities in terms of arranging some sort of a ceasefire or negotiation process.
Does the Hamas saying that it would in fact accept a peace agreement with Israel if it was put to a plebiscite in the Palestinian territories, does it change those who are saying, hey, you know, we can't negotiate with Hamas because they won't accept a peace agreement or they won't accept Israel's right to exist?
Yes, it does change it. I mean, and you have to respond to the rhetoric, even in fact, to make sure that there is more than just words to this. Mm-hmm. So I think there is a requirement on our part. It's just the question of how visible are negotiations. I am convinced that we have had contacts with Hamas and Hezbollah all through this period. I mean, we've done it in other times in other places, and I participated in some of those. But it's a question of how visible this becomes, and then how much credibility is assigned to the process if it's not visible.
Well, let's shift over to another one of our concerns in the broader region, which is Afghanistan. And actually, John, maybe John, I'll start with you again. This military parade, you and Ann have probably seen lots of these, and these are carefully orchestrated events designed to create the international photo op and one for photo op for domestic consumption. This was not the image they wanted to portray, either to the international community or domestically. Right. So what's the impact of the ceremony? Now, it didn't result in massive loss of life or significant people like Karzai being wounded or killed, but that image has got to be damaging.
Well, also remember 1981 in the assassination of Anwar Sadat. I mean, that was also a similar kind of and that one was obviously much better done.
So to speak. From a certain perspective.
So to speak. Having gone through these kinds of events in third world countries and having had presidents and vice presidents and secretary of state's visits, there is such a large uncontrolled factor involved in terms of access. And apparently these people were positioned well in advance of the event itself. Now,
the snipers.
Well, there weren't snipers apparently, because they were using AK-47s from long distance, which meant that there was no controlled shooting. And some people are saying this reflects very badly on the Taliban or the foreign fighters, as some others have said. that because they didn't use the proper weapons, they didn't go through the proper procedures, and they really didn't cause that much damage.
And so what do you think is, how does the Afghan government manage the fallout from this?
Well, I mean, I was going to say, on the other hand, it shows that they're in Kabul and shooting and disrupting this major event, and it makes it look, you know, the plans to turn over the security to the around Kabul, which is supposed to take place in the autumn. The special envoy to the United Nations has said that this will happen. It will be turned over to the Afghan army, but it makes it look a bit dubious
or vulnerable.
Yeah.
Right, extremely vulnerable, and so it obviously puts the government in a difficult place. I mean, if you're you know, in situations where people are shooting at you, it's hard to maintain legitimacy, really. And the Taliban has it seems to me that the Taliban is gaining in popularity, and it's doing the same kind of thing it did the last time, which is, you know, to show that it can restore order, provide some services, provide an alternative to the instability that there is there now. And, you know, they have this occupation fatigue scenario that's going on. So I see it as a large problem for the current government.
Robert, so you mentioned the occupation fatigue, and you have fatigue on the part of the NATO countries who are sending troops there, and there have been a movement to take them out, or at least not give more. Robert, what's your sense of how long can we sustain this? There's a call for actually greater involvement at a time when events like this and others might lead people to throw up their hands.
Well, it's hard to say. Even though the Taliban attack was inefficient, relatively speaking, it was certainly effective enough from a PR standpoint of sending all of the officialdom sprawling with their plumage flying all around on the concrete. The problem is that NATO is deeply divided over Afghanistan, and in the United States, one of the critiques of Bush has been we should be doing more in Afghanistan. So there's no sign in a presidential candidate of us doing less in Afghanistan, but there's a lot less stomach for it in the rest of NATO. And there doesn't seem to be a clear strategy as to how we stabilize Afghanistan, if we get back to what was the purpose of invading in the first place, because things are getting worse, not better, and there's less support for the occupation, or whatever we're calling it, the peacekeeping, depending on who you talk to, than before. And this doesn't help at all. It looks like we haven't built much with this regime after this investment.
Maybe somewhat ironic that the anniversary of the mission accomplished speech was recently, and this almost is a reminder that mission is not accomplished in Afghanistan. And I'm wondering if any of you can look ahead now. So if the Bush administration is winding down, what's likely to happen with Afghanistan and Iraq in terms of more of one, more of the other, or less of both, or more of both?
I think we should not be surprised by what's happening in Afghanistan. I mean, in many ways, it is a much more primitive culture and society, less well-educated citizenry than what we would find in Iraq. We also have a very divided structure amongst the allies, and Petraeus is now supposed to be going in to become the superdomo above all. But how much is he going to be able to affect every one of these units? And the second thing is, the more effective we are in terms of operational control in Afghanistan, I see this as turning out to be a negative with the Afghan people, that there is a high resistance to that kind of foreign interference.
We've got just a few seconds left before the break, and I suppose the key question here is, will we see this back in the presidential election come the fall, when we have the two nominees and they're going head to head?
I don't think we will. I think that the Democrats are very careful about playing the national security card. They have left it out of the campaign more. And McCain doesn't need to bring it back in unless someone else does, because I think he's wrapped in that plank.
I think Iraq continues to overshadow Afghanistan, and everyone says they're going to be strong in Afghanistan without being specific about what that means, and so it's left to the next administration.
Well, it also depends on if there are more of these events, like, you know, that put it
raise the profile.
That raise the profile.
We're at our break. We'll be back in just a moment on International Focus.
The Institute of World Affairs presents our community with a range of public programs relating to global issues, U.S. foreign policy, and the world economy. For more information about the Institute of World Affairs, call 414-229-3220 or visit our website at www.iwa.uwm.edu.
Welcome back to International Focus and our World Affairs Roundup. We're talking about recent international stories with our panel of John Katzka, Ann Hamilton, and Robert Kraig. And Robert, I want to start with you. Our two items on the docket for the second part of the show are the world food crisis and Serbia. But let's start with the world food crisis. There are so many things involved with what's created this situation: biofuels and farm subsidies and oil prices. What do you see as really what's at stake here? What's really at the heart of this?
Well, I mean, the price increase is a disaster for particularly the urban poor in third world countries. It's over 100% increases in staple crops like wheat, like rice, like soybeans. And there's no end in sight. In fact, it looks like it's going to get worse before it gets better. There's going to be a special UN meeting to talk about this in Rome. But there's not much the UN can do. The World Bank and the IMF are talking about it. It's related to a whole lot of factors. Global warming may be a factor because it's affecting production. There is the move ironically, towards biofuels is definitely a factor because a lot of arable land that could be used for other crops is being used for biofuels, and it's not even in a way that's reducing greenhouse gases very much. It's more to please agribusiness interests in this country and other countries. There's been a massive amount of speculation with the decline in the dollar and the U.S. financial system around the subprime mortgage. A lot of money's gone to commodities, and futures have been bought up. That's raised prices, and it's a cycle. So they've gone up and up and up, but there is a real scarcity underneath this as well. There's also growing populations in China and India that are very food hungry, and so this is a tremendous problem. There's fear from some sides, from the kind of the free trade regime people, saying that we can't intervene, we should not get involved in this, the free market can figure it out. But there are a lot of people even connected to free trade economics who think that won't work, and the situation is going to get a lot worse. And food aid is not enough either. So, and this may be the beginning of serious resource scarcity issues beyond food that are going to start to become not only humanitarian disasters, but major flashpoints in international global politics, not just in years to come. We might see this as the beginning of the new 21st century global politics in a lot of ways.
And the Secretary General of the UN has called for $755 million additional dollars going into the World Food Program to deal with the humanitarian side of this. How significant is that? I mean, Robert has touched on lots of issues that could be coming out of this, but that's a tremendous amount of aid that would need to go to lots and lots of people.
Right, and it's apparently just for the immediate crisis, and as Robert said, this should go on for some time. I think it's interesting that this time where they're setting up this international conference, that the U.S. Farm Bill is being debated. And, you know, the U.S. wants to pursue the Doha round, and a lot of the talk is about reducing subsidies in the third world, but at the same time, it raises the issue of our subsidies. And apparently, especially in an election year, some of this is the anti-subsidy, farm subsidy people in Congress are making a little bit of progress, but not very much. And when you think about how much money goes to subsidies in the United States, that could make a big difference.
Well, let's enlarge this into the European community as well.
And
the French have even higher subsidies on this. But there's an interesting dimension to what Robert was talking about in terms of the concerns about free trade. I mean, we are in this second period of globalization, and this could be the first real test of this thing, because countries are now setting up import rules and export rules in terms of what kinds of commodities can move, and there's nothing guaranteed.
Basically saying that you can't take food out of the country.
Among other things, yes. Rice being one of the issues particularly. I think this has got a better possibility of being solved than, say, the energy crisis, where we can ramp up food production. We can't ramp up energy production when there isn't any more left available.
Well, it's interesting, John, looking at what both of you and Robert have said in terms of the potential extent of this and the reaction to it of being more protectionist. I mean, is this the kind of move that would lead people to become less engaged and say, well, let's not deal with the rest of the world because of it's going to cause food problems here, or is this something that will spur perhaps a new type of or new level of international engagement?
But you'd have to change the rules of engagement in some way where we don't just say that whatever the commodities market determines is going to be the price, right? And you can't just spend your way out of it with food aid. We're also seeing Thailand floated this week creating a rice cartel, similar to OPEC, in fact, with similar initials, as it turned out, for its acronym. And so I think John's absolutely right. It becomes a challenge to the free trade regime and the Doha round, as Ann mentioned. So this has huge economic implications, but ultimately it becomes, he has huge foreign policy implications as well. There could be major international conflict over food. If your population is starving, I mean, you're going to be highly motivated as far as all the things we've discussed here. I mean, so it's a huge flashpoint.
There's already been unrest in at least 10 countries, protests and demonstrations, riots over food issues. And although it is easier to solve than the oil energy crisis, it's so intimately tied up with it that it's hard to, people can't exactly say why the oil prices are going up as much as they are. They can't say why food prices are going up. They can give a lot of different reasons, but not say with any certainty. So it's hard to separate the two.
And does this come down to almost becoming a security issue? John, if you look at...
Resources are security.
Yeah.
So it may change that debate as well, which is so focused now on terrorism.
In fact, I don't think this is new. I think this has been, it hasn't been part of our debate in the last, say, 100 years, unless you're living in Mauritania. Then it's been very much part of it, and this is not new there. I mean, the drought and the starvation has been going on there for a long time.
Let's shift gears. If we could talk now, going to Serbia and the agreement between the EU and Serbia to begin the accession process for Serbia. And John, you follow this part of the world fairly closely. What are the politics behind this move, and what is its impact?
Well, initially, or as an overview, it's a rather simple thing. It is the EU and, to a degree, the U.S. competing with Russia for Serbia's hearts and minds. Serbia is important to the EU because it lies between it and Greece and other countries in that part of the region. Serbia is the biggest of the Balkan countries. It's the most important economically as well. The issues to come back to Kosovo, and Russia has been playing that card, and it will depend now, after the EU has made this overture, how much the Russians are concerned about Serbia as opposed to the things that are going on in Georgia and Ukraine. But the urban, I wouldn't even say the urban elite, I would say the urban dwellers in Serbia would be more inclined to support the EU and that path. The countryside has much less advantage from that process. The agriculture is not competitive with other parts of the world, and there isn't really any. The industry was social industry, which provided everyone with a job, but you didn't have to produce anything.
But if in the elections coming up that the pro-nationalist forces who object to this agreement were to win, and Serbia then moves, say, further from Europe, what are the potential implications of that?
Well, I think eventually, I mean, that's a real possibility. The country is very divided, and the campaign is heated, and they're calling, of course, the president that he's violated the Constitution. He was supposed to support the territorial integrity of Serbia. So this could happen. I think that it will probably be, there will be other attempts to get into the European Union later on. It won't just end there. So I think we're looking at a long-term process. I don't think this, too, will resolve the issue of Kosovo. I mean, it would be nice to say if the European pro-European parties win, as the nationalists are saying, well, then it's done, and Kosovo is going to be recognized by the international community, and they've lost Kosovo. I don't think it's going to be that easy. Yeah. So it's part of an ongoing process. Russia will score a win in one column, but it could swing the other way later on.
We're down under a couple minutes, and Robert, maybe I'll start with you. If you have issues to be looking for or watching in the weeks ahead, or something that's happened that you think deserves a spotlight.
Well, I do think just one thing on that is that it was wrenching, I think, for a lot of people in the EU to do this while we still didn't have compliance with the War Crimes Tribunal. But they made the play in part because they thought the Nationals were going to win, and this is the only way to strengthen the pro-EU side to potentially pull out the election. I think the other big thing this week is this is Mission Accomplished Week. It's become a national holiday now. Every year on the year, the 5th one.
Only in certain places.
Yeah, we're running out. So, and if I quickly, for just a couple seconds for you.
I just point out the food conference that the UN Secretary General has called. Sarkozy and Lula from Brazil have already said they're going to go, and I think that watching who's going to go is going to be interesting.
Quickly, John.
And Russia is moving up the ante with Georgia, and that's referred to as the near abroad. Mm-hmm. And if they get too active there, they may not do anything with Serbia.
So another potential flashpoint. John Katzka, Ann Hamilton, Robert Kraig, thank you again for another World Affairs Roundup. To our viewers, we'll see you next week on International Focus.
For information about the Institute of World Affairs and its many programs, or to become a member of the Institute, call 414-229-3220 or visit us at our website.